Cutoffs and Coffee, episode 33. Welcome back. We are your hosts, James and CT, as always, here in our Cutoffs with our coffee from T3 Performance. Today, we have our mental performance coach from T3, Molly McQueary, on the podcast. We talk, obviously, all things mental performance. We talk about the do's and don'ts. We talk about when you need it, when the best time to work on mental performance, how to do it, what it is. We take a deep dive in mental performance. And if you listen for any reason, she gives away a hack of how to make the perfect cutoff. So if that is something you're interested in, listen to this podcast. You'll get that information here.
And today's episode is brought to you by Mental Reps, an online mental performance platform created by Molly to help athletes, coaches, and parents understand the game of mental performance and how you can actually create a mindset that gives you an advantage in the game of your sport that you play. Now, it's a hard subject to tackle on your own, so listen to this episode, and if you're interested, you can follow the links that we provide at the end to learn more about Mental Reps.
And if you like what we're doing here on the podcast, please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, and on YouTube. Reach out to us on social media. Let us know who you want to hear on the podcast, and let us know if you have any questions for any of our guests. Follow us and we will get that information out there to you. So without further ado, here's episode 33 with mental performance coach Molly McQueary. Coach Molly, welcome to Cutoffs and Coffee. Thanks for joining us today. How you doing?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having me on.
I am great. James, you holding up all right over there?
We're doing good. Got my espresso today. Upgraded from coffee.
Hey, I know we all got our coffees, and you'll be shocked if you're not watching the YouTube video. I suggest you cut off from Apple or Spotify and you go over to the YouTube video to see Molly rocking the first cutoff that she's worn since how long?
My senior year of high school.
Senior year of high school. That's what we try to do here with the Cutoffs and Coffee podcast, is bring the best out of our guests and bring the arms maybe out of our guests.
I'm not excited about it, but I am a team player. So when I sign up, I fully commit to something.
And there's studies that show wearing a cutoff and doing bicep curls helps blood flow to the brain, which helps mental performance.
Okay.
Science.
Cheers to that. Molly, hey, start us off. We'd like to open up with a couple questions to learn a little bit about yourself before we get into your story and your process. So why don't you tell us something about you that we need to know, James and I as hosts, and also our listeners, that we need to know about you that we can't find from either a Google or a social media search?
You'll be surprised, but I actually have the perfect recipe for a cutoff, making a cutoff. I grew up with a childhood friend who was a basketball player, and that was her staple item. So I've made a couple in my day. I know by looking at me and working with me on a daily basis, you probably wouldn't think that about me, but that's one thing. Another is I have a green thumb. If I turn my computer on right now, you'd see 20 plants in my 800 square foot apartment. So those are two fun facts about me.
I haven't worn a cutoff since senior year. You could see how we might be confused with you saying that, but do you have any, are you interested at all in sharing any of those tips and tricks, or do you think that if somebody needs to learn any of that, they just need to come and sign up for a session with you?
Oh, should I give this out for free?
If you're good at something, don't do it for free.
Hey, I was just going to say that's what the Joker said.
No,
unless it's this podcast. This podcast is free, as our listeners know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Touche.
Fold the shirt in half. Put clips at the top, 2 clips at the top of the shirt, and 1 halfway down where you want to start cutting, however far you want it to cut. Then cut your little half circle. That's the tip.
Here we go. If that's all you take, you can stop the podcast now, listeners, if you want. You've learned everything that we know. Hey, next question. How about this? My answer to this next question is going to be cutting cutoffs. But Molly, tell us something, a skill that you have either most recently learned or something that you are currently working on.
Currently working on is French. I'm trying to learn French. I I studied abroad twice in college and was lost while I was in Europe. If we did not have our guide with us, I would not have made it out of there. So I want to go back and I want to make sure I know at least how to get to the bathroom or where a bathroom could be at, or, how to order food. So that's what I'm working on now. And don't ask me to speak any.
To me, impossible.
Duolingo's fine. Just an app. Couple minutes a day.
That's it. Consistent reps.
Yeah.
Well, here we go. Take us back. Tell us your story. Tell us how you got into what you're into now, and tell us what you're up to now. And then from there, we'll take the rest of the conversation.
Cool. So I am originally from Kentucky. You probably can tell by my accent as we get into this. It will come out. I try to hide it, but I'm originally from Kentucky, a really small town. We have 4 stoplights. I think maybe 5 now that I've not been home. Very, very small town. Grew up an athlete playing multiple sports, but really swim was like my main thing that I started from the age of 4. Swam until I couldn't swim anymore. And that's what really brought me to where I am today. I had the same exact swim coach from the age 4 all the way through my entire career with swimming. And she was very, very hard on us, but she was like a second mother to me. So she really got me interested in coaching. But as an athlete, I was very, very anxious. And growing up in rural Kentucky, there was no mental health awareness, let alone mental performance coaching going on in 2015, right? But I was the athlete who would get sick before events, and it wasn't from the external pressures. It was just not knowing how to handle my physical responses and the thoughts that I was having as an athlete. So I went on to college where I was pre-physical therapy, applied to physical therapy school, got in, but my last semester of college, I studied abroad in Australia, and I had a random roommate who's now my best friend, and she was with the sports psychologist over there, and I was with the physical therapist at this research study, area, and every day we would go home after work, and she would just tell me about scanning brains, and they were traveling with pro rugby players. And I was just fascinated. I never heard anything about this. I didn't know this existed. So after that 5 months, I came home and I took the 2 sports psych classes my last semester of college and decided to ditch physical therapy school. Went straight into the master's and then went straight into the doctorate, which is just now getting finished up. So that kind of brings you up to that, up to speed.
So as you're kind of like making that shift, obviously it wasn't just like, oh, I'm going to stop doing everything I thought I was going to do and switch to mental performance. Is there anything like in particular that stood out as like maybe a shift in how you wanted to help people? It sounds like, from early on, you wanted to be involved in athletics and help people. What was it that really kind of pushed you, other than a general interest in psychology, to kind of go down this different path?
Mm-hmm. I think just my thinking about my younger self is what really is my purpose and why, and being able to get that in the hands of as many athletes like myself. But it was not easy to just drop the pre-PT. Like, this is a new field, right? And so I was just really looking for any opportunities in the field. So when I was taking all the master's classes, like, I don't know even where to start with getting a job. So there is an association for sports psychology, and they threw a conference, and I had actually just moved to Cleveland. I was wanting to get out of Kentucky. A lot of my college friends were from Cleveland, oddly. So I was like, let's just do this. Let's have a change. And a week after I moved to Cleveland, I flew to Portland for this conference. And I was just listening to completely different people talk about what they were doing on a daily basis at the conference. And Brian Miles spoke. who is the Indian sports psychologist, mental performance coach. And I stood in this long line of about 55-ish people. And I almost left the line because I was like, is it even worth like shaking his hand and introducing myself? But I stayed in the line, shook his hand, and he was like, when we get back to Cleveland, let's connect. It's like, all right. So we got coffee, and just his whole entire vibe, we just hit it off. And from then on, he kind of showed me a different way of thinking about mental performance, because in school, you are kind of taught the whole couch method from a psychology standpoint, an office method, and that's just not what mental performance coaching is. So once he sparked that inside of me and opened up different avenues within mental performance for me, I think that's really what shifted it, and it gave me the courage to get the internship at T3 and really try to figure out how could we make this a thing there.
I'm interested in your thought on, even writing the word recent doesn't sound right, because the first time I had heard about mental performance, I was a junior in college and I graduated 2009. So 2008, so it's been over 10 years now. So maybe recent's the wrong word, but, James, I was asking you after her story when the first time you had heard about it was, but I'm just interested in what you think about kind of like the recent popularity, again, using the word recent loosely, the recent popularity of mental performance. Is it a really great thing? I mean, obviously, you're somebody who's involved in it every day. Is there a chance that it gets kind of like, washed out like some of the other things, and watered down? Kind of where do you stand on that, and just the new popularity of mental performance training?
I think the recent popularity is exciting, obviously, but it's scary considering there are only, I read, after I got my certification, I read how many people there were in the US. I think it was like 570 certified mental performance coaches in the US. And there are a lot more people doing mental performance training than 570 in the US. And that's not to say that you shouldn't listen to other people who don't have certifications, and there are different types of certifications. I'm not saying you should only listen to a sports psychologist, but I think if you are giving someone your money and working with someone on something as important as your brain, you need to make sure that they have knowledge in that and agree in that and know what they are talking about. That's what I would say on that question.
New athletes every day, right? People are picking up new sports, and people are challenging themselves physically and mentally every day. And I would say 100% of these people would benefit from, a mental performance coach, and only having a couple of them would make it tough and kind of easy. Nowadays with YouTube, being able to go search and find something, you're not always going to get the best information as you would like sitting down and talking to somebody who can figure out who you are as an individual and as an athlete. Can you talk us through that process? The first time you meet with an athlete or a parent or a team, what that looks like?
Yeah. So when I'm working with an individual athlete, it simply starts with a conversation. What is mental performance? What is their performance like? I get to know about their behaviors a little bit better. How do they prepare? How do they respond to failure? What are they like at their best? What are they like at their lowest? How are their body's physical responses to stress? How are their sport relationships? What outcome do they want to get out of this type of training, so that I can then make a game plan that fits them best. In psychology, they would call it like an intervention plan. But after that first initial conversation, it's kind of like a puzzle, figuring out that athlete, what's missing, what do they already have, what could we take away even. I make the joke that it is always my goal to lose the client, because that means the stuff that we're doing is working. But that doesn't mean that I don't have clients for 2 years straight, where they check in as it's needed. So I really come up with a plan that fits that athlete best. But that's not to say if an athlete comes in for a session one day and it's week 4 and we're supposed to be creating a reset routine, and they come in and they sit down and they just want to vent and talk about something else, that's what we'll do. These sessions are theirs, and I want to make sure it's something that the athlete is getting out of it what they want. So that's kind of the approach working with an individual. For a team, it's kind of similar, but the coach is a lot more involved. So understanding how their systems work from a team standpoint, and how maybe we could create a better culture and communication together, but listening to both the coach and the athlete, so we can get that together for a team.
So like as you're getting to know this new athlete, what are originally them going into the session, like what do they perceive as their intended outcome for working with you? And is that often different than what the actual outcome is? If you can kind of talk through some of the, I guess, misconceptions of what mental performance might be for an athlete, because I don't really believe it's getting mentally tough through some hard conditioning that a coach is doing because they don't know what else to do with their time. And so then they, end quote, do mental performance training by doing 10 sprints after a practice because one kid made a mistake. So, you know, how do you start that process of taking what an athlete thinks mental performance is and then kind of working towards your intended outcomes with that athlete?
Yeah, I think I used to go into sessions with this whole idea that it was my job to take the athlete somewhere, but usually they just take you where you need to go. But it starts with a really like an educational standpoint. You know, like I don't want to, it's about keeping it simple and not throwing too much at them. But a lot of times, like those athletes will come in thinking, you know, I want to be more confident. I want to be this, I want to be that. But then it turns out after talking and communicating with each other and asking them a lot more questions, that, oh, it's the people that I'm surrounding myself with, or the way that my parents are talking to me before or after, or the expectations that I feel, and learning how to navigate those certain situations a little bit better, is a lot of the times what happens, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and you know, I guess a good example to kind of put that into some context for an athlete, right? So let's talk about, you know, the baseball player. You work with a lot of our baseball players at T3 Performance, and you know, maybe initially they're thinking like mental performance is my ability to, you know, improve my batting average. But you know, kind of what you're talking about is more preparation to get into a certain mental state of mind when they're playing, and then help them be able to reflect after they're playing to be able to make adjustments. You know, without, you know, obviously giving the names of any of your clients out, you know, do you have any specific examples of some switches that you've seen turn on in kids after working with them for a little while, and some of those notable differences, kind of how they carry themselves or whatever it may be in their sport?
I like how you said like improve our batting average, where it's like, well, first we have to learn how to maximize the downtime that we have in baseball. Because if you aren't maximizing that downtime that you have, you're not going to be able to perform when you actually get the chance. So I think it's creating that awareness as well. Yeah. So I think the best part of my job is getting to watch athletes actually play after we've been in sessions together, brainstorming all of these and creating all of these routines, or getting text after performances that they just felt a lot better. I think some big wins is seeing consistency, spikes in their stats, changes in composure, the readiness that they feel. I have worked with a lot of younger athletes who are put in high pressure situations, and they, without, you know, obviously mentioning names, but a lot of them deal with the self-doubt and the expectations that are put on them. And that visibly shows in the box, it shows on the mound, and it also shows after they've made multiple errors. And so I've had the opportunity to travel with a lot of the players that I work with, and seeing them come back from failure quicker is one of the biggest things that I would know. Okay.
So Molly, you mentioned high pressure situations for athletes. Now, what is that high pressure situation? Is that something that the athlete perceives to be high pressure situation, or are there actually high pressure situations? Like if you don't make this shot, your team loses the playoff championship game, or is this external pressure that they're perceiving that they need to perform? Is it always, based on performance and what they do on the field, or are there external factors going on?
Yeah, so a lot of the athletes that I do work with are put in those high pressure situations, whether that be a pro case that they're going to have those radar guns on them. But when you zoom out, a lot of it is their thoughts creating a higher pressure situation than it actually is. And so a lot of the work that we do is having the awareness to step back and ask themselves the question of, is this moment as big as I'm making it out to be? So a lot of it is perceived.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I'm sitting here kind of reflecting on my career. And like you mentioned, you recognized you were one of those athletes who was not able to, for lack of better term, just like kind of handle that pressure. And you said it was put on yourself. What were we doing before we kind of had this guidance? Were we just like naturally figuring out what to do? Or do you think it was athletes who took more reps in these high pressure situations, got better at them? Again, I'm kind of just reflecting on what I was doing before I was introduced to mental performance, and relating it to the point where we've got athletes today who have resources and opportunities to reach out for help, but may not think that they need it. Right. What do we think kind of that missing link is for athletes who are aware that there's this benefit to it, but just don't think it's something that they need to do? What's the link that's missing there?
I honestly feel like the misunderstanding is because of the lack of data. So when you're in the weight room, you are upping your weights, right? Like you are seeing physical changes in your body. And so much of what I do is not shown in data, but by behaviors, feelings, relationships, emotions, beliefs, perceptions, and even conversations happening and changes in those things, which is a feeling. And so it's educating them on how important. I'm going to use an analogy. If you have a NASCAR that is specially made to run, but you do not have a driver who knows how to control that specially made car, it doesn't matter. Right? So you could be doing everything from a physical standpoint, tuning your body, making it exactly how it needs to be to go out and perform. But if you do not know how to control the thoughts you are having, the emotions that you are having, the physical responses in your body, you're not going to have that advantage. Right? You're not going to be competing at your best. So creating that understanding and awareness for athletes.
That's a great point. And I know you and I have talked about meditation a lot, and it's something James and I talk about every once in a while here on the podcast. Very, very similar, right? It's one of those things where you've got to just understand that you need to trust the process for a long enough time, because there aren't these really markers. There aren't meditation PRs, right? I went for this amount of time. I got this deep into meditation. I was able to slow my heart rate down to this, and it's very similar. What are some of the other obstacles that you get from, athletes you're working with, from parents, from kind of people of authority who, you want to give them benefit? And I'm asking selfishly because I try to push these things on my athletes and they kind of give me some kickback from it. What are some of the other obstacles outside of just data that you have seen when approaching mental performance coaching?
I think pricing, especially when we're working with teams. If you give a team a list of things for them to pay for, options like a menu, do you want strength conditioning? Do you want nutrition? Do you want, all the things? Mental performance is probably going to get picked last. And I think it's just that lack of education, but they're going to say it's money. So really just like not understanding it. And then also working with, let's say, schools in general. I would say, well, we already have counselors, right? We already have counselors for our athletes. If they want help mentally, they should just go to the counselor. But there's a big difference between clinical mental health and sports psychology. While there may be some overlaps, I don't think that they can help an athlete like someone who is, educated in a sports psychology realm. I would say those are two big things.
So so when I grew up, my father was a psychologist. He was a guidance counselor. He had a private practice, and I don't think our conversations, and sorry, Dad, if you're listening, on the way home from games were necessarily the best. So I clearly see that distinction between like having that, clinical approach. And to my dad's credit, he is renowned in the area as one of the best psychologists. He's now currently an adjunct professor at BW, continuing to pass that knowledge forward. He's one of the brightest people I know. But at the same time, like, even if I went 3 for 4, we were talking about the at bat that I struck out. So, and you're seeing this, with the athletes that you get to work with. How are you able to have that conversation with parents to make the distinction? Like, these are what we're talking about, and this is not my realm. And that can seem like a sticky or an awkward conversation.
It's very difficult. But in that first session that I have, especially with youth athletes, I'm bringing in the parent at the end, and I'm getting their perspective, but I'm also letting that parent know up front that what the athlete and I talk about stays between us unless the athlete says otherwise, right? But I think there's an importance in a collaborative approach because that parent is the one that's driving that kid home and also taking that kid to the game. And so I have interactions like this on a daily basis where I'm in a session with an athlete and we kind of discover, oh, this me playing scared and out of fear of failure is coming from how my dad's going to react. Even just me looking over in the stands at how he's reacting in the moment, but also what I'm going to get on the way home. So we come up with a plan together, the athlete and I think it's best to have the athlete start to educate their parent on, hey, I'm going to try out this new post-game routine, where really it just allows the athletes to set boundaries. If I'm working with a youth athlete, I'm not going to say, your parent sucks and you need to set boundaries with them because, I don't think it's, I think a parent would probably laugh if a 7th grader said that to them, right? Or even a high school boy comes home to you and you're like, I need to set this. My sports psychologist said I need to set this boundary with you because you suck. No. So what we do is we say, all right, if I'm a 17-year-old football player and I drive myself home from football games now, but as soon as I walk in the door, I can't even collect myself or go to the bathroom before we have to sit down as a family and discuss every error that I made. So instead, hey, parents, I'm going to try out this new post-game routine where after I get home, I'm going to go upstairs and I'm going to journal and reflect on what I did well today, what I didn't do well, and then what I'm going to do about it moving forward. And then when I'm ready, if it's okay, then I'll come downstairs and I'll tell you what I think that I did those well today and didn't do well and what I'm going to do about moving forward. And then I would love your feedback. If you agree on that or anything that you could add, like I would be happy for you to tell me then. But I want to take my own time to kind of reflect on my own performance. that's one example of like how we could set a boundary without saying, hey, I'm setting this boundary with you because what you're doing is inappropriate, you know? Because at the end of the day, these parents think that they are doing the best and they want the best for their athlete, but they don't realize and recognize that what they're actually doing is creating a scared athlete who's not, I mean, they're paying for all of this training and they're just sabotaging all of that by the interactions and the communication and the language that they're using with their children. So that's just one way that I navigate that. And then if the athlete feels comfortable for me to talk to the parent, I do that. But I also just will send, some articles that they could read or suggest a book that they could read. Send just good resources over for them as parents that may be beneficial to their relationships.
Do you find it a little easier to work with older athletes because they don't always have that kind of back and forth with their parent? I guess I'm just thinking, the guys who I was involved with in professional athletes we've worked with, you kind of have your system already. So at first I was thinking, oh, this would be an easier thing to give to younger athletes to then develop and get more comfortable with it. But then now after hearing that, I'm thinking maybe it's easier for the older athlete. What are, I guess, some of the biggest differences between, if you're going to get a youth athlete like you just talked about, and then an older athlete who's already established and already a professional, and you just need to add this little piece into their performance? What are the differences there when we get our older guys?
I think it's harder working with a younger athlete because they do have those people who are constantly giving them feedback that they're not asking for, and it may not be in the right time, right place. But with the older athletes, so much easier because they're removed from that environment. When they get older, they really get to decide who they surround themselves with. But they also are old enough to have those difficult conversations with their parents. And I do think it's a lot easier working with older athletes because they get that choice. They get the choice to continue to have people involved or not.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just think about the older, the older athletes get, the more they're stuck in their ways. Oh, I've never done this exercise, I'm never going to do it anyway. Right. And then James is really good at getting athletes who've been super established in what they're doing to try new things and then get better and think all of a sudden, whoa, I wish I was doing this the last 10 years of my career. I think mental performance is possibly kind of in that same realm. How about if you're watching an athlete, you talked about the great opportunity to go watch athletes play. When you are watching the team play and obviously focusing on the athlete you're working with or the athletes you're working with, are there traits that we can see in athletes that you can pick out and think, okay, I could be beneficial for this athlete in this situation by their body language, by how they're reacting and talking to people? And if there are, what are some of those traits that you look for and that we as performance coaches can kind of keep our eye on as we're working with athletes?
Yep. So I'll just go back to the story about, traveling with the baseball teams this summer. Super easy to tell when an athlete is stressed in my eyes. You see them, tense up. You also see just their body language change in general. And so when I have the opportunity to work with these athletes individually, so it's fun to see how the sessions translate. So that being on deck time is a really big time where I could be beneficial, or the routines that we are getting in place are very beneficial. I also think that downtime is where we're beneficial as well. But also after, let's say, a strikeout, when that athlete is walking back and they maybe slam that helmet, drop a big F-bomb in front of all the parents as they're walking back, big way for me to get involved. And that's another big win that I've seen is a lot of those boys don't know how to hold the composure. Maybe after they've just thrown 3 balls or they've struck out for a second time today. So seeing those shifts and changes in behavior after we've worked together are some big examples.
Are there things that we can do as coaches who maybe see them, their sport coaches, right? Their strength coach, maybe see them more often than you do, to be able to gauge the either mental stress or just state of, the athlete mentally? Are there things that we can do, questions we can ask, drills we can do with them, body language things we can look for, to recognize that athletes need a little more, maybe a little different conversation when they come into the weight room with us, or when they come to the come to practice? What can we do as coaches who see those athletes often to be able to kind of guide them in the right direction?
Yeah. Everything is made of systems. And before or when you look to improve something, it's good to understand how systems work, right? So we want to help our athletes improve physically, but we also should be looking at that athlete as a whole system. The same is true, with your athlete. Like I said, understand their systems and how they are running, their sleep, their nutrition, where are they spending their time, how are the quality of their relationships, the quality thoughts, quality focus, quality of their stress responses. It's your job to create open lines of communication when it comes to all of those things that I just listed. So building those relationships to check in on athletes' mental state doesn't have to be hard. I don't think there has to be like 3 set questions that you ask every single day to your athletes. If you're building those open lines of communication, and improving those short interactions that you do have, even if it's just choosing those 2 athletes a day to seek out with intent, I think you're going to be able to gauge that mental state a lot better. James runs the velo group at T3, and I go once a week. That may be the one day a week that I see those athletes, but during those that 1 day a week, I'm really observing their behavior, so that the next week, that when I'm there on Tuesday and I see an athlete looks a little bit more tense than normal or isn't interacting with the group like normal, I'm going to intentionally bump into that athlete that day. What's going on? What's new? Not the basic, how was school today? They don't want to hear that, right? But if you're just being observant, you're going to be able to tell that there's a change in body language, the interactions they're having with the people around them. Something's off in the system if you have that open line of communication.
So as a performance coach or as a sport coach, you kind of just like hinted on, like, we don't need to ask a kid like, how was school today? They're going to hear that from their parents anyway later. But what are some of the good questions that we can ask, and how do we ask those questions? Because I feel like we could ask the same question, like, how was school today? Or, hey man, what was your favorite part of school today? And I know there's just like a slight difference, but like it can engage in a different conversation line. Are there similar questions like that we can kind of use as a opening opportunity to have some of those conversations with athletes?
What went well today? Ask for the specifics. Make them think. Open-ended. What went well today? Anything not go well today? Right? It's just open-ended. That's the one thing. Like, make them give you specifics. If you ask those closed-ended questions, you're going to get one-word answers. That's not going to get you anywhere. So open-ended, always open-ended on those systems that I just talked about.
So is the best case scenario for us as coaches to just set up a culture to where athletes talk amongst themselves and talk with the coaches and be open and have conversations with us? Because that feels like, as you talk about the system and you talk about some of these specific groups and some of these athletes, that in a perfect world, athletes would be comfortable going to their sport coach and going to you if they need to. Is it a culture thing? Is it something that we can all strive for, or is it all kind of individualized based on the group, the setting, the athlete? And tell me if I need to go a little deeper into that question to make sense.
I work with a lot of teenage girls too. And last week I had a conversation. They're in two different kind of training environments with different coaches, and this one athlete is, and they hate going to one environment and love going to the other. And I said, well, let's talk about that a little bit more. Why do you love going to this environment? And she was like, oh, well, I can ask questions without being made to look stupid. I also have a choice in the things that we do. So in that environment, she's allowed to ask questions, and she's going to get help and answer. She can fail quickly, and it's all right. Like, we're just trying stuff out. We're learning. And she's also given a choice. So she feels like she's making a difference, that her voice is heard, and that she actually has a choice in that environment. Whereas in the other, she's shamed if she makes one mistake. She's punished if she makes one mistake. She's embarrassed in front of the group if she asks one question. So there's a difference in those two environments. And so as a coach, which environment are you creating? I think you need to reflect on that, and also ask questions to your athletes. What am I doing well? What do you like that I do on a daily training session? What would you like me to stop? What would be beneficial for me to stop doing? Is there anything you want me to continue doing? I think you need to ask as a coach, what kind of environment are you creating?
Now, do we have coaches, honestly, that want to even look at their environment, right? Because like we kind of have, this, I guess the assumption is, right, so we're going to be a coach, and we're going to focus on the skills of the sport. We're going to focus on winning and losing, but we never really can take a step back and then look at what kind of environment are we setting up for our athletes. But then on the other end, you have like some forward thinking coaches who do that either intentionally or unintentionally. And then are there any steps that we can take? In your case, you're working with different schools as well. Are there steps that we can take to kind of start having coaches look at that differently? And I think it's something that anybody that's working with coordinating athletes, whether it's performance training or whether it's like a sport, there's so much value to the environment that we provide, but we don't always see it that way. Have you had any success being able to get people to shift their thought process in the environments they create, and what did you do to get there?
It starts with the coaches, right? And having, if I'm going out, so I was able to work with multiple football teams this past season. And with a football team comes a big culture, right? And it's not easy to shift those cultures. But I'm going in every other week, and I'm holding sessions with the athletes, and I'm educating these athletes. If I left it at that, I would be doing that whole team a disservice. So I take an educational approach with the coaches as well. Not only am I, telling the coaches what I am teaching these athletes, but I'm also making sure like they are aware that they are the ones in the trenches with these athletes, making sure this gets implemented. So I'm always taking a coach approach to this, and how asking them, like, are you creating a psychologically safe environment? Right? Are you setting expectations so your athletes know what they're getting into? Are you creating those open lines of communication? And so I think getting started, it's important to have somebody to help you do so, right? To maybe just educate you on how to get started at that.
But I'm a football coach, and when you say psychologically safe environment, I'm like, whoa, that's too woo-wooey. We don't want any of that here. This is football. I don't know if you noticed, we hit each other. It's not safe. So like, take me back to the 90s, where we're wearing those, awesome crew necks, and coaches were hitting their head, into athletes' face masks. Like, we still have that kind of attitude. Like, how do we get that coach to understand what that even means?
Understand what psychological safety means?
Yeah. And be open to, like, looking and making changes? Because I feel like that could be difficult.
Oh, 100%. But I think if we look at the MLB and the NFL, we're looking at the best people in the industry. They're incorporating this type of training, right? 30, I think it's 31 MLB teams have a sports psychologist on staff. Look at what the best of the best are doing. Do you want to have a competitive advantage, right? Or not? This is just adding in a different tool for your athletes to pull out.
So you've had a little bit more success when you kind of go with the like, hey, this is a competitive advantage. This is what these teams are doing, and that's where coaches start to open up into, being maybe more willing to listen to what you have to bring to the table.
All right. So if we wait until a team is struggling to get them started with this type of training, good luck. Right. We have to prepare our athletes. Like, you are putting your athletes are training their bodies physically every single day. And so if they're prepping from that standpoint, I mean, it goes back to that car analogy. You can yell at your athletes to relax or to focus, but it's going to trigger the exact opposite response. It all goes back to just educating on that aspect with the coaches. But most teams that I'm working with are seeking me out. So I'm not really having to do much of that begging to work with their team, right?
Mm-hmm.
If a coach reaches out to me, they're pretty forward thinking.
I keep trying to think about what would stop a coach, either performance coach, skills coach, whatever it is, head coach, from reflecting on some of the things that we've touched in the last few minutes. And the only thing I can think about is just, it would be maybe a personal shot to the individual's ego, right? That they think that they have control. They think they're doing the right thing. So they don't even ask the questions that are, like we talked about the two women athletes who felt uncomfortable in one situation. Why wouldn't that coach? What would be the benefit of that coach not making it a comfortable environment? Is it just that? Is it because we are the leaders in the weight room? We are the ones who call the shots. We are the ones who tell the athletes what to do. And again, not really much as a question as it is like a meditation. Why wouldn't a coach want to try to set up the best environment for their athlete?
I think behavior change is hard. And I think when a new person is brought into your environment, that threatens your ego and all of the things that you've worked hard to build. And change is scary. And so, I could ask the both of you, when I came on staff, how open and willing and ready, were you, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Molly, on Cutoffs Coffee, we do the interviewing. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's like a good point, right? So it's like, I took psychology as a minor, not that means anything, but then I also sought out ways to help improve my mental performance as a baseball player. And to me, that I was always open-minded to the topic in general. Now, being honest, I don't really have that easy of a time building trust with anybody that comes on board. So initially, it's okay, let's sit back and watch for this internship that you did, and then I can actively decide how I'm gonna perceive you as a mental performance coach, if that makes sense. So it's to me, the concept has always been super important. And there's so many crossovers with what helped me when I was an athlete, that what helps me now, hopefully be a successful performance coach, but that's not everybody. And I know CT, we've had conversations CT about mental performance and what your pregame rituals were and what you did, during your career. And we had those conversations during your career. You're a forward thinking individual as well. I don't think that's the norm.
Yeah, and I think the situation it was brought to me was, the big team setting, and then maybe out of the 105 guys who were on the team, and maybe the 50 of them who were getting ready for the games every week, maybe 4 of us took advantage of it. And I remember other people would, just kind of like, you hear them talk about it in the background. And again, I think it's maybe a woo-woo thing that people don't connect with. But I remember thinking, if this is going to give me an advantage by just being here, like, I don't have to do anything else. I'm either going to like be here, or I'm going to be like texting on my phone that had T9 Word back, like when I first, found out about this thing, like way before smartphones. So I was very open to it, but some people seem to be, again, like a little bit resistant. So I know when we added this aspect to our training, I knew it was going to take off. I didn't think it would get to this point. I mean, where it's awesome. And Molly's working with tons of people, tons of teams, and it's so cool to be able to see that. But, I was thinking, selfishly, for a couple individuals who needed it, like this was going to be a beneficial thing. So it's so cool to see how it's grown. I guess, Molly, my next question is, because again, kind of where James and I ran into it as, when we were playing, how do you start? How do you begin? Are there resources that we can send athletes to? What's the first kind of step to get us on this process?
I think the first step to mental performance is being willing and ready to scout yourself out. Identifying and recognizing the consistent patterns of yourself and your performance is something that's hard to do. So you got to be willing and ready to even get started, and just simply practicing noticing, right, throughout your day, throughout your performance. But some free resources, I know that there's some like shame in social media, but there are some good resources on social media. I love Justin Sua. He's a Rays mental performance coach. He puts out a 3 to 4 minute podcast every single day. Super quick, super easy. I have a mental reps text group of about 20 athletes. Some of them are not my own private clients. Like, we don't do one-on-one stuff, but the guys have just added in people that they think, oh, this would be good. And every day I send out a text. Some of those are Justin Sua's 3 to 4 minute podcast, and they love it because it's just quick and easy to listen to. Lauren Johnson, she was the Yankees mental performance coach. Now she works with a ton of CEOs, Fortune 500 companies. So if you're looking for a more personal development, business side of things when it comes to mental performance, she's great. B Miles on Instagram, on Twitter, he puts out a ton of good stuff too. All
Those are
free
awesome.
resources.
Yeah, those are awesome. Thanks for sharing. I had an athlete confess a few things to me at the gym the other day, and I said, well, I got to get you some sources, send them your name and your information, but also that's super beneficial for anybody to have. All of those, everybody's on social media now. So that's great to be able to have that. Molly, I'd like to transition into talking about how you figured out how to kind of put everything that we've talked about this last hour in a course. I want to know what it is, what it's called, who it's for, where we can get it. Why don't you talk us through that?
It is called Mental Reps. Thank you, James, for, the quick and easy names that he's always good at coming up with. But this course is meant for athletes and teams. So my thought is for anyone who has never done mental performance training before, that they can use this course and come out of it feeling like they have done 20 sessions with me, right? I have made this as interactive as possible, full of videos, worksheets, quizzes, activities. So my goal when I started at T3, it's funny, just like I was doing quick 5-minute sessions with athletes after their workouts. Then it turned into one-on-one. Then it turned into me going out and working with schools, and then working with university hospitals, surgeons. And I mean, it's just like turned into so much that I can't make it to every single school that we work with and work with every single team that we have at T3. So that's the inspiration behind this, is getting all of these mental domains into one platform that's in your pocket, on your computer, that you can pull out and use and educate yourself and your team on a daily basis. So there are multiple lessons on this course. We're going to talk about the importance of thoughts and how to manage them. We're going to talk about how to regulate your physical stressors, your physical body responses to stressors, how to manage your emotions, motivation, goal setting, confidence, focus, routines, and there's even a portion on there for coaches to utilize as well.
There's no way we need it as coaches, right, Molly? It's just the athletes who need all this stuff, right? We don't need any help.
Not at all.
Head coaches, performance coaches. What does the future of mental performance look like? If you look, 10, 15, 20 years down the line, what in a perfect world does mental performance look like in the sports world?
In a perfect world, it's starting athletes young. It is treating the brain like you are treating your physical muscles, so that you are fully prepared to go out and let your body do what it can do, because you are prepared and in control from a mental standpoint. It's having more resources for athletes, making it more accessible to get this type of training in a perfect world. In a perfect world, every school would have a mental performance coach. Every team would have a mental performance coach. There would be as many mental performance coaches as there are strength and conditioning coaches in a perfect world.
Do you think there's a higher amount of conversation, or do you think it's still pregame, halftime, end of the game? Do you think athletes would benefit from hearing from the coaches more often, or do you think the role is similar?
I think the role is similar. I think I don't feel like, I mean, I just said, I made the joke, it's my goal to lose the client, right? That means it's working. I want these athletes to be handed the resources that they need, the tools, the skills that they need to go out and practice this on their own. The things that I'm working on with athletes in sessions are meant to be used and applied in a quick, portable way that's accessible. That's what makes it different than clinical psychology, right? They don't have to come sit down on a couch with me to get what they need. We're prepping them to be able to do this on their own. They're getting the reps in at this just like they are the physical. And that's the exciting part, is that these things are skills. So the more that they do these things, the better they're going to get at them and the more developed they're going to be. But this not only applies to sport, but after sports ends, these are skills that they can use in their daily life as adults.
You've given us some really good resources on social media, but I know also between the three of us, we've kind of passed around book recommendations. And I just finished Culture Code, which was recommended from you. And that was, top 3 now books I've ever, if I can use the word, read in the audio style. One of my favorite books. So give our listeners some book recommendations that you think would benefit everybody.
Well, just recommended this to James. 15 Invaluable Laws of Growth by John C. Maxwell. Very good. From a parent standpoint, even a coaching standpoint, but Justin Sua came out with Parent Pep Talks. Very easy, quick read. I think that every parent should read. And let's see, Limitless is a good one. Have you guys read that?
I've only seen the Bradley Cooper movie.
Which was phenomenal.
Yeah, anything with Bradley Cooper. No, I'm not familiar with Limitless.
It's also good. Let's see. I'll have to pull out my my app. The Obstacle is the Way, also another good one that we've all
Yeah.
read.
Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
Ryan Holiday. My Mima's probably watching this, so I shouldn't curse. But The Subtle Art of Not Giving a very good book as well.
What's the app you use?
I have Headway.
And that's just a free audiobook app?
It gives me ideas and it gives you short summaries. So I'll read the summaries to see if it's worth even getting the book or listening to the book. Yeah.
Okay. Got a couple good recs there. A few questions kind of finish up. What is either a sport or an athlete who you haven't worked with yet, who you would love to in the future work with?
Sport that I have not worked with. Okay, this is gonna be really weird. Curlers. That is who I've been watching the Olympics, and I always watch the Olympics, but I just think that curling is so interesting, and I would one day love to work with an Olympic curler.
I don't even know where I would start with that. I have seen the curling, and it's fascinating. I don't know where you go to do it. I don't know who
know where
people are who sign up. Yeah, I just
coach. I don't know. I know none of that. So I have some education to do on it. But yeah.
I mean, I think the fascinating part about that sport is the team dynamics and communication.
Right.
And that's, where, like, honestly, if I was going to guess what you would have said, I would have guessed right. And you're not going to believe me, but I swear to God. I swear to God.
Weird. Like
this. I was watching it the other day, and I'm like, wow, this is so cool to see how this is like, going back to NASCAR. It's like how a pit crew communicates. There's so many things going on, and it's just a very interesting dynamic for a competitive environment.
Right.
Is there anything, excuse my English, big pillars of anything that you wanted to talk about that we missed?
Not that I know of.
We got it covered. Okay.
But before you ask your last question, I want to bring up kind of a topic that kind of ties back in some of the stuff that we mentioned earlier on when you were talking about an athlete and they go to play their sport. Does the work you do with athletes help them be able to literally play their sport the way they intended it to be fun and get enjoyment out of it? Because do you see what I'm saying? So it's like we play sports to have fun, but then all of a sudden, like, we're so good at screwing that up. And to me, some of the value that you give to the athletes you get to work with is you make their sports fun again. Can you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, these kids come to me so stressed and unhappy and worried about something as small as a game. But it's not small to them, right? It is their identity. And that's where they lose the fun. So before we even leave our first session, I'm like, all of this is meant to improve your performance, right? That is our outcome. That's why you're here. You want your performance to improve. I said, but I am also mainly concerned about your well-being. Are you having fun? That's the biggest part. And so when I see an athlete come to me and they're just not happy in their sport anymore, and then you get to go watch them do these skills that we've worked on, and they're actually playing fun and free and loose again, maybe crack a smile when they usually are just so serious. That's the exciting part about it. So 100%, it's not about just improving our performance, but overall identity and finding fun again in their sport.
Great point. And I think strength coaches and performance coaches need to understand that as well, because athletes stress out about the gym, that they're chasing numbers to try to hit so they can get to their sport practice, and then they get to their sport practice and they don't enjoy it. And then they get to game day and they stress out. I mean, it's just like a horrible negative feedback loop.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to be better understanding that the athlete is going through that. You know, and I guess I don't specifically mean Molly, James, and CT. I mean, we as a culture, right? Which kind of brings us into the last question here, Molly. What do you think we as performance coaches are missing as far as making the connection between the physical performance and the mental performance?
I think this goes for strength coaches, sport coaches, parents. We wait, and I've said this already on here, but we wait until an athlete absolutely needs it to say, oh, we have this resource, or, oh, hey, you should probably go talk to her. That's what's missing. The amount of phone calls I've gotten from coaches and parents in the past week because tryouts are coming up for a specific sport. Hey, just like we got to get what's your schedule like? Can we please get in today at 4 p.m.? What is that going to do? Oh, we have this tryout coming up. Bob Beck, Ryan Rue, can we please get on your schedule right before for 30 minutes? Because it's going to turn my kid into this amazing, great athlete. No, it's not how it works. This is not how it works. These things are skills, and you need to be prepping your athlete ahead of time. The best athletes in our facility, from a baseball standpoint at least, let's say, at that age level, they've been doing this for 3 months because they know the season's coming up. And they want to be prepared to be on the mound by themselves when things aren't going well. I don't want to repeat what happened last year. I want to be prepared this year to control my emotions a lot better. I want to feel a lot better out there. I want to control my thoughts a lot better. So let's start 3 months out so that whenever it's time for me to do what I've been preparing to do from a physical standpoint, I can do that. Right? So taking a more preparation approach and angle to this is what's missing.
And right after your 30-minute scheduled appointment, Molly, they've got to work with James for 30 minutes because they got to drop a second off their 60 time before tryouts. But we only have two sessions.
Then you're bad at your job. What are you not doing at your job that my kid didn't do it? Perform like they were. Why is my kid feeling anxious? They met with you for 30 minutes. Why is my kid not running faster? He was with you for 30 minutes. It's not how it works. It's not how it works.
Yeah, I don't mean to laugh because it's not funny, right? But it's just a situation that we get in often. Molly, people want to know more. People want to find the mental reps course. People want to talk to you. People want to meet with you. Where can we find you?
Mental reps, all of social media, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok even. My email is the best way to really get in contact, molly@t3athlete.com. It's where you can get more information on the course and set up any session.
Yeah, and listeners, if you're reaching out, make sure you mention that you found out about Molly on the Cutoffs Coffee podcast.
Because it's sweet.
Because it's sweet.
Thank you, Molly, for coming on. I've 2 pages full of notes here. And I think that was super beneficial and is going to be able to help a lot of people and reach a lot of people. And, you know, like you mentioned, this, I think, answers a lot of questions that they might have about what you're doing, what we do, where mental performance is right now. And I think this is super beneficial for people to listen to. And hopefully people take this stuff seriously, just as seriously as they take their physical training and reach out to you and make sure that they're checking all the boxes and doing everything they need to do as their athletes and their kids get into their sport. Hopefully, ultimately they're able to enjoy it, perform, but also able to enjoy it. So thank you again for being on. Thank you for everybody who listened. Thanks for all the dogs for being great here during our podcast. As you can see, Molly's back there over her shoulder. But for all the listeners listening, please continue to practice gratitude. Tell the people that you love them, and live your life stimulated. We're not just talking about the caffeine. So thank you guys. We'll see y'all in the next one.